welcome, and indeed your hosting of this event is much appreciated, and we hope in due course to be able to reciprocate maybe at some point. Welcome to this discussion on a socially inclusive transition to a European circular economy, which is a new report just published today by a group working with CISL, thank you, by the Materials and Products Task Force, which is part of the Corporate Leaders Group Europe, which itself is facilitated by the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. I'll give a brief overview of that in a second, but my name is Martin Porter. I'm Executive Chair, CISL Europe, based in Brussels, and work with all of those three organizations, and I'm very pleased to be able to introduce this session today, to introduce the report, and then to have a discussion with a number of those involved in it and being able to comment on it. So thank you to all of you for coming and indeed for responding in due course. Just very briefly, this is how we will run the session today. I will give, as I said, a short, and I promise it will be short, overview of the report, not least because it is now live, so if you haven't already read it, please go and download it. It's on the website, so you'll be able to access it. Those who have agreed to respond, I'm pleased have already seen it and have had a chance to review it, so they're not going completely blind and into the discussion. And we would obviously encourage you to go and look into the detail of the report itself, which obviously has much more in it than I will talk about or that we'll be able to get into in the short period of time that we have today. We will go to a Q&A. So once we've heard initial remarks, we'll have a set of questions and answers from the panel. I will obviously offer that to the audience, but I will make sure that we'll have an engaged conversation whether you feel you want to put questions or not. And I'll make sure that we complete everything within the hour, because I'm sure that you've got many other events that you need to go to here at the COP. So with that, let me just briefly reiterate what I said about the three organizations associated with this report. CISL Europe is part of CISL, based in Cambridge obviously, but with offices amongst other places in Brussels, where I am based. And we work across a number of different activities to do foresight, education, convening, and innovation. This is one of the activities that we're very pleased to have been able to undertake with one of the groups that we convene, the task force, as I mentioned, on materials and products, climate neutral and circular materials and products in particular. And that group comprises a number of leading multinational companies who are very active, forward-thinking and progressive in this area, and who we work with in a cross-sectoral fashion to seek to understand the issues associated, to advance this agenda, to overcome some of the hurdles associated with it, and to see how there's a business opportunity from these issues developing when there is the right social acceptance and the right degree of government and public policy support as well. So the companies that you see here, we're very lucky to have representatives of two who will be able to talk about this today with us. And let me very briefly, therefore, turn to the report itself, in case you haven't had a chance to download it and already scan it quickly. By way of background, I'm sure this is not a brand new issue to any of you in the room, but has become more and more important over the recent past, not just obviously from a climate perspective, but circular economy is increasingly recognized as an essential part of the answer to being able to follow a 1.5 degree pathway and to decarbonize as we're looking to achieve through this COP. There are other issues associated, obviously, with our use of resources, and you can see some of the figures which are well known with that rate of for the natural environment, for our use of resources, for our economy, and so on. So there are many good reasons why this is an important subject for us to tackle. From a European perspective, and this report was in particular developed looking at the European context, there has been an enormous amount of policy attention over the last 5 years as part of the European Green Deal, which has sought to promote rules and regulations which will advance this agenda, set in place the types of conditions that will enable much greater circularity to be achieved through different sets of value chains, by different individual companies, by groups of companies, and so on. and not only because those are issues which are important from a climate and environmental perspective, but also because they can clearly lead to efficiencies, productivity gains, economic gains, competitiveness gains, actually, from a European perspective. And as part of this, very importantly, the European Commission has estimated that over 700,000 net new jobs could be achieved within a European context if this effort is successful by 2030. So a considerable number of new employment opportunities are on offer in principle. But one of the questions that we're looking at in this report is something which has not been thoroughly investigated and dug into thus far. It's not me. Right, okay. Which is the social dimension of this effort, and particularly how inclusive it can be. Structural change to the economy, a change in the nature of the way, obviously, we're developing circular economy solutions, can also have positive social impacts, but could also have potentially negative ones, unless we are aware of those, think about them in advance, try to avoid them, and just try to reap, therefore, the benefits of this without any downsides. This is part, essentially, of the just transition agenda, therefore, which we need to pay attention to if we're going to ensure there is widespread public acceptance and buy-in to this agenda, as we believe, obviously, there should be. So this report looks to examine, essentially, that social dimension of the circular economy transition, and to understand what the issues are, where there may be areas of concern, what public policy and indeed what businesses are doing and should do more in order to make sure that we get the right answers. So just a quick word on how we went about the work. It's a combination of desk-based research. There's a lot of literature on circular economy, climate, social issues, relatively little which looks at all of those together, but we've tried to draw the threads together through that research. We've also discussed this with members of the task force, but also more widely beyond as well to get direct input into that. And we are asking a series of questions that you can see here. How do we essentially get the maximum benefit out of this without any adverse side effects on social issues? Indeed, get the maximum social benefit out of this? And what are the barriers and opportunities associated with this that we need to take into account from a business and a policy perspective? Obviously, much of this is focused on the EU policy agenda. That's not me, is it? No. Apologies in any case. Much of this is associated with the EU landscape, the European Union's policy agenda, but many of the policies themselves are replicable or similar either at a national level or internationally. So we believe there is much to commend what we're talking about here in wider international terms too. So in the conclusions, essentially, I'll run through from a policy perspective, but one of the main areas that we've identified from this is that notwithstanding those employment benefits, which are considerable, some of the categories of work and some of those who are undertaking that work may come from groups in the economy who are already marginal or vulnerable and therefore likely not necessarily to be beneficiaries of this in the way that we would like. There are certain groups, and you can see those mentioned here, who, unless we take active consideration of, risk being potentially further marginalized, in other words. So that therefore begs a question, both from a private sector perspective, what is it that is already being done to consider that and to address that, but also therefore what is the policy agenda that needs to be developed to link a considerable amount of social legislation and policy that exists already to the circular economy and climate and environmental agenda even more effectively than it is. So those are essentially the issues and the questions that we have sought to address. And we've looked at it, as I said, both from a European perspective, but also to the extent that the value chains we're looking at here, and therefore the employment impacts in those value chains, extend beyond the boundaries of the European Union. Many of the value chains obviously are international, and we're looking at the extent to which these are international as well as European questions, therefore. The policy conclusions essentially are the ones that I will run through quickly here, and at an aggregate and disaggregated level as early as possible on in the process of developing both business socially just circular economy is, the more that then we will be able to take those into account. This also will require public funding. Like many of the issues that we're talking about here in Dubai, there is a significant need for investment and public funding to be able to address these questions, both from the private but also the public sector. And therefore, to get the synergies where they exist, that will be important for us to see governments and businesses and workers' representatives in unions working hand in glove, and to strengthen the coherence between all of these policies so they work together rather than in silos. In addition to that, the EU obviously needs to recognize the international dimension of this agenda, and we're very fortunate that we've got companies who work in an international context day in, day out, who obviously reflect that too. And that when we are working, for example, in a European context, that we also recognize we've got to have definitions of the types of employment and the issues we're dealing with here that work internationally as well as within a European context, so that we have a shared terminology, a shared set of data, types of activities around climate or environmental questions that we're looking at here at the conference. So that's a brief overview of the report. Like I said, I would encourage you to dig into it. There's lots of detail in the annexes, there's lots of case studies and so on which you will find in it. But if I could now ask a couple of people to join me up front, Maria and Sergio, to begin with. I'd like to begin by putting a couple of questions to you before we have some third-party views, let's say, in addition to those who are working in the task force. So, Sergio, maybe I could begin with you. I have...
Thank you.
Thank you. Sergio, so you work for CEMEX. Maybe you'd like to introduce yourself and CEMEX, and a couple of questions, if I may, to begin with. What is it that you are doing to advance circularity, and why? And after that, maybe you come to the questions of what you're considering from a social inclusivity perspective in that process.
All right, good. Thank you, Michael. Well, first, my name is Sergio Menendez. I'm based in Madrid. I manage the operations of CEMEX, which is one of the largest building material companies globally. We are present in cement, ready-mix, aggregates, construction products in general. The cement and concrete industry, not only CEMEX, but in general, the industry plays a key role in the circular economy. Not many people know, but we co-process annually about half of the total volume that we sell. And there is basically three, let's say, circular streams for us. One is municipal solid waste that is used to replace fossil fuels. Actually, CEMEX in Europe replaces around 70% of its fossil fuels. We don't no longer use, instead of using coal or petcoke, we're using treated municipal solid waste. The second waste stream is byproducts from other industries, for example, from the steel industry, aluminum, and so on, that is used as raw material either in the input of cement or as an addition to cement in some cases. And the third waste stream is the construction and demolition waste. Not many people know also that concrete can be recycled indefinitely. So everything that you see around, by the way, concrete is the second largest used material after water. So we see concrete is an essential material for the world development. So all the concrete that you see can be recycled 100%. So that's the third source of circular material. Just in one waste stream, in the municipal solid waste, we co-process approximately all the equivalent of all the waste of a city like Madrid or Berlin in a year in a region. So the industry do play an important role in the circular economy, and that role is growing. The reason we're doing this, in the case, for example, of the municipal solid waste, is replacing fossil fuels. So CO2 emissions in our products are much lower by using these materials. Also, they have a high content of biomass, And what they do as well is by not sending the waste to landfills, we're avoiding also huge emissions of methane. So that is something that is progressing. You see several countries in Europe now where landfill is banned. And coming back to the regulation, there are many other things, which one of the best ways to co-process this material, that is the residues after recycling, is through the cement industry. And then construction and demolition waste, the same thing. No, it helps reduce the amount of cement or natural materials that need to be extracted, and it also helps reduce the CO2 footprint in all our products. So really, it's a nice fit in the circular economy. In the scale of what the cement and concrete industry can do is huge in the circularity of the economy in general.
Thank you. And maybe if we can go to Maria first of all, before we come on to the social questions. Maria, you are not Ramon, I should say, before we go on any further, in case anyone is confused. But thank you very much for standing in for Ramon, and I'll let you introduce you and your company.
As Martin mentioned, I'm stepping in for Ramon Arratia, who is the CSO I'm based in London. And Ball Corp is here, where circularity is the absolute key lever to achieve our climate targets, which include a 55% emissions reduction by 2030 across all scopes, 1, 2, and 3, and achieving an 85% recycled content. 75% of our emissions come from aluminium. So our ability to stay competitive and to have a future as a sustainable company, really decarbonize and circular business. So circularity, as I mentioned, is a recycle almost infinitely. It has a fantastic compaction rate. It's easy to handle and move. It's safe to move compared to other materials. And producing recycled aluminium only requires 5% of across all our regions for policies and regulations that are related to circularity and to recycling. Basically, deposit return schemes and extended producer responsibility that will help us achieve those goals. We also work with our suppliers and the suppliers of our suppliers to also decarbonize primary aluminium, because we still consume some primary aluminium, but again, we are aiming for an 85% recycled content by 2030 across all our products globally.
Fantastic. And maybe we go back to Sergio. So the question of the social impact of this set of activities, I guess on the one hand, what do you see of the benefits? And secondly, as you've seen from the report, there are potential questions of vulnerable workers that need to be addressed. Have you seen those? Have you seen them elsewhere?
Thousands of new jobs and higher value jobs being created. So I was surprised by the 700,000 employees figures. I engineer a fuel from municipal solid waste. The talent that we are hiring, the companies that are preparing these fuels, are creating, dozens or hundreds of new jobs. So just in that area, and we are still probably halfway through the potential of replacing fossil fuels with alternative fuels. No? So that keeps growing, and it's actually replacing probably jobs that would be at landfills, that nobody wants to work in a landfill, for jobs that are in specialized manufacturing facilities that are local as well. It's not this product doesn't travel, so those facilities are in Europe. In the case of construction and demolition waste, it's also probably there we are like maybe 30% the industry of the total potential. And then you see, for example, I think there's a very interesting case in France that was implemented last year with a producer's responsibility program, in which when people buy concrete, it's already paying for the recovery of the demolition when the building or the construction ends its life cycle. So that's creating a huge ecosystem in the case of transport, processing, manufacturing that didn't exist before. So really it's generating many new jobs that are better paid than what was before, and highly skilled with higher skills than what before. No? And we're still probably halfway through the potential of all of these employments.
So in a nutshell, you would say this is net.
Technical, in order to, for example, the specs that you need to replace a fuel, or the specs that you need to include those materials in concrete, are quite high because
Okay.
they are used to construct high-rise buildings, hospitals, schools, many highly technical specifications.
Great, thank you. So, Maria, same question to you,
Okay,
really.
social aspects.
Yes, how do you see it in your company and in your sector or anything beyond?
So, Ball Corporation is the founding member of the Aluminium Stewardship Initiative, and we're working to get all our products certified, ASI certified, which includes standards in terms of social and environmental sustainability. Aside from that, the policies and regulations we advocate for in terms of recycling are, as I mentioned, deposit return schemes and extended producer responsibility. And the point we're trying to make is that these regulations and policies come at no additional cost to governments, the governments who implement them. And in a deposit return scheme, consumers pay a few cents every time they buy a single-use piece of packaging, and those cents are refunded to them if they bring back that piece of packaging to a collection point. And that works in many countries of Europe already. The thing is, not all the single-use pieces of packaging are claimed back. So we are thinking that it will be useful to use those funds that the deposit return scheme collects to support the development of good jobs in the recycling and waste management sector. We have a great example that is not related to DRS in Brazil. Speaking of supporting other regions to develop waste management jobs that are decent and inclusive, Brazil achieved a 100% recycling rate last year. They recycled every single piece of aluminum cans that they produced. And waste pickers are the key to this magnificent success, and also cultural change behind that. So waste pickers, which became in the beginning were a very informal sector of the economy, organized over time to recognize the values and aluminum cans and started picking them up and achieving a 100 recycling rate last year. They are now organizing cooperatives. They are working with our suppliers to provide them the scrap and the used beverage cans to be recycled. Our suppliers are working with them, providing the logistics for them to work better. So again, they created an entire system, and they create other children with scholarships. They are very sophisticated players in the supply chain, because now they sell aluminium and they track the LME price. So again, very sophisticated and very well organized. And we think a lot of developing countries can learn a lot from them, but also Europe, in the way that a deposit return scheme will support the development.
Support, regulation, public policy, and so on. I'd like to ask our next two panelists to join us, if I may. So, Erin, welcome. Deandra, welcome. And maybe we'll come back to that question of government policy and support once we've given both of you a chance just to reflect on the report itself, but also what you've just heard, and then we'll continue from that. And maybe by way of introduction, just a brief word about yourself, your organization, your interest in this set of activities, and over to you, Erin.
Sounds great. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for having me and your lovely comments, too. My name is Erin Lighthizer. I'm an Associate Director of Nature and Climate with BSR, and as well on the faculty at Copenhagen Business School, where I've done a lot of work on these issues around the circular transition and highlight particularly around issues around social transitions and the just transition. Because we know, kind of from research and in past work, that those who are the most at the margins in the system, as that system improves, also tends to Bangladesh, as we've seen the minimum wage rise, that the proportion of women working in the industry drastically reduces because men come in there. So I think in some of the work at Member Network, who we work with mostly very large multinational companies on a variety of sustainability issues, including things like just transition, to really kind of help support them in making that change with their practices. And we recently undertook a scope. We know that there is the challenge and the potential for us to kind of replicate or create structures that will continue to margin. And there's also a great opportunity because we can just be thoughtful about it. Yeah, I'll pause there.
Fantastic, and we'll come back to how we achieve that in a second. But Dahendra.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me here. My name is Deanjani Vukala and I am the Youth Delegate of the European Economic and Social Committee, which is the civil society branch of the European Union. So we have 3 groups of members. We have employers, employees and civil society, all represented here within our delegation of 7, plus me as the Youth Delegate. It's basically my role to bring a youth perspective and bring the opportunities that young people can bring in the climate change space to the committee. So I absolutely loved the report, I really did. We brought 2 position papers forward for COP, one on agriculture and food security and the other on the Just Transition Work Programme. And essentially because we are civil society, we then bring them to the European Commission in order for them to consider them within their negotiations at COP. And we were actually focusing as well on the social dimension of a just transition. What does that look like? Is it in terms of capacity building and other measures? So it's actually great to see that civil society and business are linking up in this way and are talking about the same kind of things. I really liked as well, Maria, what you said in terms of the deposit return scheme, that you were seeing that people, like, not all of the things were being returned. It's like it's a reevaluation of the mechanism that you're using, and that's great to see, because sometimes you just think like, okay, they're implementing this measure and now how is it going to be returned to? How is it going to be ensured that it's actually working for people and that, you know, there are jobs coming out of it? And I love the focus on learning as well. And I had a question, actually, if you don't mind, if I could put it to the panelists. I was wondering about how lots of people don't know about these kind of things. And I think about the job possibilities as well for young people, that they would definitely be maybe more inclined to apply to companies like yours if they knew these things, because I think especially as young people who are informed about what's going on in the climate space, it's very easy to be very reactionary with things, to see one bad headline and be like, okay, I'm not buying from that company anymore, I'm not going to deal with them, I'm not going to consider them for career prospects. So how is this information being disseminated, and is there anything that like we can do in terms of helping you to, I suppose, contact communities that maybe don't hear about it?
Great, thank you. Well, I think that would be a perfect question to put to both of you. And I think the question on how you're disseminating also links to data. And are you collecting data that enables you to assess the extent to which there are age groups, genders, other categories, if you want, of either current or potential employee that are going to be advantaged or potentially disadvantaged in this transition? Because obviously the data is going to be crucial on this as well. But your story, I mean, your dissemination, what are you doing on that?
Okay, so aside from the public affairs advocacy efforts that we have with governments, we also work with different coalitions. The first that comes to mind is the one called Every Can Counts. And it's basically an initiative that aims to generate awareness among the general public of the value and importance of recycling aluminium, which is a very precious metal, and all the benefits behind it in terms of employment and sustainability, circularity, and like climate change in general. In terms of the data, I don't think we have of informal coalition so far that's called the Aluminium Can Recycling Coalition, and we're working with our competitors, with our suppliers, and the suppliers of our aluminium cans globally. Actually, the call to action is going to happen right after this panel in the green zone, and we're calling for policy. First and foremost for recycling targets, policy to support those targets, the implementation, of course, of policy, and the collection and generation of new data. to support the new system that we need to either create in some countries or reinforce in other countries that are already cycling cans.
Thank you. Sergio.
In our case, something similar, we work with other organizations like Semburo, GCCA, in order to communicate on the possibilities that our industry brings to make a change. And we're actually seeing people joining us because they know that we're a hard-to-abate sector. And the more we show how are we progressing, what is innovation needed in order to overcome this challenge, is attracting especially engineers, young engineers, male, female, to work to make a difference, make an impact. So what we're trying to do is engage in universities, different programs to let people know of the opportunities in our industry. But definitely, I think there's much more that we can do, and things that they're not about waste streams, no, but mobility, things like that, no, in terms of the types of employments that are being created. But I think it's moving in the positive direction, and much more to do in this.
So I think maybe two of the biggest asks or frustrations that I hear from businesses, and of course quite curious to hear if this aligns with your thoughts too, is one, I think, of using the role or seeing the role of policymakers as being able to create that level playing field. Because I think what's really tough is when others are working really hard and doing lots of R&D and spending a lot of time and resources on driving towards these solutions, which tend to require a lot more resources to do, and we have to figure it out, and it's not easy, and that's a lot harder, and it's hard to be competitive in a very price competitive environment if that's the case. So I think, to the extent that we can help raise the bar for all companies to be able to play on a level playing field, and then of course, be able to offer the kind of pathways to be able to get there and to be able to reach compliance, I think is really critical. I think the second area is one around risk, and this is maybe in these new areas, and I think to help, to de-risk some of these investments that they are making and creating a supportive policy environment. So I think this is perfect with both of you talking, because I think the recycling, return circularity system is the piece we haven't figured out yet, and at least I always hear it lots from companies of, gosh, if we could just get our materials back, it would be so much easier. Then we could absolutely create this closed loop system, but we of course need policymakers to help create and push everyone towards that kind of environment so that companies can do this kind of work to be able to implement those strategies either individually or in collaboration with others.
Thank you. Narinder.
So essentially, what do we want policymakers to do?
Yes, and I think maybe building on what we've just heard, particularly with a focus on the social inclusivity questions, which the report suggests are tackled, but almost in a silo without being linked to many of the policies which are promoting much greater circularity. So do you have any observations on that or other reflections on the inclusivity questions that public policy needs to help answer?
Absolutely. So I think the first point from a youth perspective would probably be increasing transparency. I think it's very easy to not know what is going on and just go about your daily life and not know what you don't know. So essentially, I think, if young people had a way to find out about what policymakers were doing, it would be much easier for them to actually go to companies or go to policymakers or contact their representatives to say, well, you're doing this, but we would actually like you to be doing this. It's a lack of knowledge about what's going on, I think is a very big thing. And then I think secondly would be education. I don't think we can be active citizens, like I was just saying, unless we have the education to know what a circular economy means. Even the term circular economy, it's often thrown around as, I can't think of the word. It's used as a term that maybe has different definitions to different people, and I think it probably depends on the sector that you're in as well. And it's, my words are just failing me today, I'm very sorry. Essentially, we need to, if young people don't know how a circular economy is linked to social issues, then there is no way that they can go and act about it. All of these things tend to be in silos. And all of these words are used interchangeably. That's the word that I was looking for. They're used interchangeably. Lots of them lack definition, and I think that was one of the main things that I loved about this report, is that you're really pushing for definitions and for identifying characteristics of what these things look like, because if policymakers don't know, then how are we supposed to know? So
Indeed, thank you. And I guess another point in the report is that it seeks to build on the terminology that is already existing and to better categorize and define the types of employment and employee, therefore, that is doing certain types of job associated with circular economic activities. There are core, enabling, and then impacted workers, each of whom may feel a slightly different effect, essentially, from the greater move to circular economy activities. But maybe if we build on that, then you've heard a couple of points about what government needs to or could do to support this. Do you want to comment on whether they sound accurate to you, and in particular whether this question on the social dimension, because I think the ones that you mentioned, Aaron, were level playing field and de-risking. Are there other ones in relation to inclusivity or the social dimension to this that need to be just joined up, maybe, if not developed? Sergio, first.
Sure. Have a practical point of view. For example, when we think about municipal solid waste, and I think the vision of zero landfills in Europe, I think it's an appropriate one, and that's related to the waste directive. The waste directive exists in Europe, but it's not being implemented equally in many countries. So today you see landfills in Spain, or in Bulgaria, or in Romania, Poland, and other countries do not have any landfill. I think that's a vision that everybody agrees with. No landfills, right? No methane. Now, the moment you enforce the waste directive, immediately new jobs are created with much higher degree of quality, and we have seen it across Europe. It's almost as there's nothing else to do, because immediately those jobs are formalized. Maybe, people that were working in landfills, yes, need to pay attention, but how many people are working in landfills in Europe right now, And I think it's appropriate to have a policy to think about, okay, how can we reintegrate into formal jobs and so on, no? But compared to the new jobs that are created by treating all that material in landfills is a minimum percentage. Then on the construction and demolition waste, something similar is happening. In many countries, laws are not being followed or enforced. So what is happening is that demolition waste is being dumped in illegal sites or landfills. So that's material that has a value and could be replacing, natural materials in construction. So enforcement of the current regulation is one step. In that case, for example, yes, drivers that are transporting those materials to illegal sites, for example, but those drivers are employed in a formal or regular economy. So again, I think from a practical point of view, having the right regulation and enforcement of the regulation creates a whole ecosystem with much more employment at a much higher level. And we have seen this successfully in those two examples. It's just some countries in Europe that are lagging behind. And something that we're working, especially being a company based in an emerging market, to try to implement those regulations. For example, in Mexico, in Colombia, in the Philippines, in Egypt, we're doing that kind of work, sharing the European Waste Directive, sharing the regulation regarding construction and demolition waste, and with the opportunities to create a business and ecosystem out of it.
Are you seeing associated employment opportunities in those countries in the same way as you would do in the European Union? Yes.
Absolutely. And we have, so for example, in Mexico, we are co-processing around 1/4 of all the waste generated in Mexico City. And by doing that, we are creating over 200 new employments, more technical, higher paid than the employments that were at the landfills. No, that's where sometimes you see child labor and things like that that shouldn't exist, really. No?
Very interesting. Thank you. Maria.
Well, I think that education is absolutely key, level playing field. Circularity offers so many job opportunities, from innovation and research to, I don't know, I'm thinking of course about aluminum cans, but to lightweighting and thinking how we can improve the alloys that we need to manufacture the cans to make it more efficient and easier to recycle. But also waste pickers are always members of, the marginalized segments of our society. So I think that just thinking of circularity and assuming that someone will pick whatever the regular consumer will not take back to the shop or to the shop, it's just going to happen. We need to think how these mechanisms can empower and help and support and give an opportunity to all these people who, again, are in the most marginalized segments of our society, in the developing countries, but also in Europe. All those countries that you mentioned have landfills. There's probably a massive amount of waste pickers that are in the fringe of society and the economy. So I think that policy that has this in mind and can leverage, again, existing policies and mechanisms that are already there that will probably come at no or very little cost to the government, and make the most, the best use of it.
Very good. So we haven't got much longer, so I just want to check if we've got any questions before I put some final questions to you. But we have one question. Did you want? No. Do you want to introduce yourself as well, just so we know?
Thanks very much. Gareth Presh, founder of the World Health Innovation Summit. I've got like a couple of points. First on public policy, because I was a policymaker myself for years, spent about 15 years doing it. It's about value creation, so you need to change the mindset. So most government officials look at it as if I'm the custodian. Next on impact, just a question, have you considered the impact of health and well-being? Because this is a big opportunity for you guys, because obviously air pollution kills millions of people. This is a value opportunity for you to tell to Microsoft about the future of work. And I was explaining to them that my 10-year-old is only interested in homeless people, helping them, and becoming an artist. So if your business is not aligned to social value, you won't have a business in 10 years' time. So they're my kind of questions and points.
All right. Thank you very much. Would anyone like to go first on that? There's 2 or 3 different questions that we can go for. I'm going to pick on you, Erin, first as a...
Thanks. Yeah, and really great questions. And I think this is something we're kind of actively exploring and trying to figure out how this practically looks like. Because yes, I think if government is kind of setting the level playing field and what are those boundaries, I think this is where we also have the opportunity to start to think about these issues more holistically. So I spend a lot of time thinking about nature and biodiversity and the overlaps, not just with climate, but individual health and community health and the provision of clean air and water and all of these things. And I do think, and I don't know, this isn't very much of an answer, but I do think that we need to be better in thinking about the solutions, because the problems that we're facing are not these individual problems, right? And we're kind of making these separations artificially. So can we get to more holistic solutions that can really start to get to the multifaceted nature of the issues that we're facing?
Thank you. Deandra. Maybe I can direct you. The interesting question about have we considered the well-being dimension of this, which I guess we'll come back on to the companies as well. But does that strike a chord with you, the well-being aspect to this?
Yeah, definitely. I think that young people especially, I read recently that eco-anxiety is actually the #1 cause of children and young people going to speak to psychologists at the moment, which is absolutely insane. And I think it does come back to the earlier point of, if we had the information, if it was being disseminated to young people in a youth-friendly manner, then this might lessen the effects that it's having on their mental health. And then I think as well, we also need to be thinking, like, we're talking about landfills, we're talking about all these things, and like, we haven't spoken about air pollution really, and the effects that has on workers' health. So I think these impacts are going to be long term. And I think as well, I saw a survey recently, it was Paul Polman that done it, and it was a survey of 4,000 workers across the UK and the US, and they said that half of them were considering quitting their jobs because of a mismatch of ethics with their employer on the environment. So I think it's not just what you were saying about your 10-year-old, that there's not going to be a company there in 10 years' time, there's not going to be workers there in 10 years' time if things don't change. But we have heard a lot of positive things today, so I think it is about, all of us taking it away today, putting it in language that all of our people that we're working with are going to understand. And yeah, we're working forward then from that.
Very good. Thank you. Sergio.
Absolutely, it's a key point. We operate over 600 physical sites in Europe, and these are in communities where you have a ready-mix plant or an aggregates quarry or a cement plant. So there's a lot of work that is happening in those communities, starting with our employees, children of our employees, and the communities where we operate. Because without their support, there's really no way we can operate in these facilities. So, for example, all of our quarries in Europe are committed to be nature positive by 2050. And we do have a program where we can, actually it's a lot easier now with technology to measure what is the impact in terms of CO2, flora, fauna in that quarry when we started operating and when we stop our operations. And it's actually quite exciting to see. It's almost unbelievable when you see one of the quarries that cease operation, the amount, for example, of bird life or flora that exists and so on, compared to, let's say, 1980s, 1970s when we started operation. So it's kind of mind-blowing. So that's part of the work to communicate, to show that, to bring people to those quarries. Many of those quarries take a social role, for example, for nature tracks or for bike tracks with the communities is part of the plan to return those facilities to society once we stop our operations there. No? So that's part of the way we're approaching it.
Very good. Thank you. Maria.
I completely agree with Sergio. Like, social license is absolutely key, and I think that by being transparent, we're not only serving our investors and our stakeholders, but also our communities, our employees, and also, we're able to identify what's going wrong or not so well to be able to improve it. It's not a matter of, like, just again informing or assessing the risks of the business, but also identifying what's going wrong and change course or correct course. The climate transition plan that we published in March offers a pathway, but also offers two alternative scenarios to make sure that we acknowledge the possibility that this ideal pathway that we're envisioning might not materialize. And again, we want to be transparent about it and make all the corrections needed to make sure that we are a sustainable business. And that's one of the reasons we founded the Aluminium Stewardship Initiative, to make sure that we are sustainable and we have a social license to operate, not only considering our operations, but the entire value chain, from bauxite mining to the can that you're going to open in a few hours maybe.
Fantastic. Well, keep the mic. We've got just a few minutes left, and I just want to ask one final question of you before we wrap up, which is, are there any lessons that we can draw from this particular experience with respect to particularly the climate challenge in a much wider sense, that you would say, whether it's from a storytelling perspective, whether it's a social justice perspective, what in 30 seconds do you think is the most important thing from this particular report or the work that you're doing that we should take from a climate agenda perspective? Should we start with you, Maria? You only have a few seconds to offer a last thought, and if you don't want to, you can pass to Sergio.
No, I think that again, words should not be used interchangeably, and when we're thinking of circularity, we should think about all the dimensions involved in it, because we need a systemic change, and business as usual is not working, will not work, and we need to change the way we manufacture, we consume, we think, we envision, we dispose of our waste, everything. So I think that starting to considering all the social dimensions involved in circularity is absolutely key.
Thank you. Sergio.
I agree. I will highlight moving from a narrative of disaster on the climate, on the problems, on this negativity, to the possibilities that it offers to create development, the opportunities for youth. There are many, many possibilities that are created by a green economy. What we know, for example, in our case, that we are part of an essential industry, is that the transition is possible there is a business case for it, and it's encouraging. There's a lot of innovation coming, a lot of startups. So focusing on that positive aspect on one side. The other thing I will highlight is the importance of collaboration, because it cannot be done by one entity alone, one industry. It requires support by governments, also the companies, public policy. So I think it's a joint effort to achieve that transition. So it's possible. It's exciting. It creates a lot of possibilities, innovation, and what we need to do as well is to deliver and to be transparent on showing the progress, the delivery, because it's what society expects from us, right?
Thank you. Erin.
All right, I'll try to be brief. I think maybe the takeaway for us as we think about the circular economy is, I think, to recognize the interconnection, that it's not just about transitioning materials and systems, but also the impact that that has on people, and particularly the most vulnerable. And so this, I think that we're really at a crossroads. So I think more than anything would encourage us to be really thoughtful and intentional, because I think while we have the risk of perpetuating inequalities and replicating these structures that are inequitable, we also equally have the opportunity to design a system that could be much more equitable and use resources much more efficiently and be able to address multiple issues at once. So I think as much as anything, I think my message to leave with is of one of being intentional and thoughtful.
Fantastic. Deandra, the final word, bar my wrap-up.
Echo everything that has been said. But I think it's just been really nice to hear what's happening and what is being done, because there is so much scaremongering and negativity out there that it's all consuming. You go on social media, it's absolutely everywhere, and I think lots of people are starting to kind of switch off from it because of that and the effects that it is having on their mental health and their day-to-day lives, which obviously isn't the answer either. So I think, this event and this report it's a really great first step, and I hope that this kind of collaboration is something that we will definitely see into the future for the benefit of absolutely everybody.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed for a very concise as well as very eloquent wrap-up there. So I'm left with a wonderful sense that actually a report that tries to look into and anticipate the social implications of an issue which we haven't unduly focused on from a social perspective gives us a bit of foresight and anticipation that means that we can anticipate to improve and avoid any downsides. But actually, we hear a lot of opportunities already being realized. Perhaps the sectors or the particular value chains are ones that lend themselves to that, but nonetheless, those examples are powerful. And of course, they illustrate the way in which partnership can take place, exactly as you said, collaboration and partnership across value chains and between governments, workers and businesses together. So with that, thank you very much, Deandra, Erin, Sergio, Maria. Thank you all for coming. I hope you found that interesting. Please take a look at the report, which you'll find online on the CISL and the task force websites. And with that, I wish you a very good onward afternoon and a not too tiring end of your COP, whenever that may be. Thank you very much indeed. Very good.